So he's going to take away $2,943, but give back $1,800, and then ask you to be thankful for it, Mr. Speaker.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Question period was packed with controversy today. Trudeau admitted what we knew all along, and the NDP broke rank with the Liberals on a supply vote.
Let's take a look.
While common sense conservatives fight to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost or corruption. We found yesterday that his government is under RCMP investigation again, this time for ArriveCan. The commissioner of the RCMP revealed, however, that the last time they were investigating him for criminal activity, he blocked them in the SNC-Lavalin affair from getting cabinet documents. So will he lift cabinet confidentiality and hand over all the documents to the police so that they can investigate any of his potential crimes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Okay.
Right out of the gate.
That's quite the opening for Pierre. And but here's the thing: he's not waiting. He is just going all out right now. It just seems the Conservatives, any shot that they can take, they are putting just as much pressure on Trudeau as they can. And Trudeau is falling in the polls. He used to be at around 26, 27. In terms of popular vote percentage. Now he's hovering between 22 and 24. That's significant because that's a consistent trend.
That's bad, folks.
It is, and that's getting into NDP territory, folks. So,
so Jagmeet Singh could be the next leader of the opposition. Who knows?
I thought you were going to say he was going to be the next leader of the country. I was going to say,
what
the heck is
God
going
help
on?
us all.
Mr. Speaker, the situation around ArriveCan is obviously unacceptable, which is why authorities are looking into this procurement process. And anyone who took advantage of everything we were doing to try and keep people safe during COVID to get rich will face consequences. That's the way our system works.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
But that's not the way the system has worked since he took office 8 years ago. According to the RCMP Commissioner, he not only refused to be questioned in the SNC-Lavalin criminal investigation and in the Aga Khan Billionaire Island investigation, but he blocked key cabinet documents from being included in those investigations. We now know that an app that was supposed to cost $80,000 went up to $60 million after the NDP helpfully voted for those extra funds. We don't know who criminally benefited from that. So once again, will the Prime Minister waive cabinet confidentiality, turn over all the documents, yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
This is where Trudeau is in a tough spot, and he has no wiggle room to get out of this because Canadians are seeing all of this now, not just through Northern Perspective, but Canadians are paying attention to what this government is doing. You're welcome, Liberals. You started this when you locked everybody down in COVID. Now everyone's paying attention to you. So if you have nothing to hide, why would you not waive cabinet confidence and allow the RCMP to see what they need to see in order to prove your innocence?
Well, and that's the thing. When you're this stubborn to provide evidence, to me, it's beyond, again, just being stubborn. And, well, I don't want to do it because the Conservatives want me to do it. To me, it seems like there's got to be something deeper because it really is tarnishing the Liberal image to the Canadian public. So why would you allow that to happen if you weren't protecting something?
The Leader of the Opposition's digging into the past to try and bring up things that were settled many years ago. But if he really wants to talk about the past, he should talk about the fact that the Conservative leader was at Transport Canada working hand in hand with the minister as the founders of the company involved in ArriveCan were getting millions of dollars in contracts from the department he was working for. Mr. Speaker, we are taking seriously any concerns around procurement. The authorities are looking into it. There will be consequences for anyone who took care of our COVID protection efforts to get themselves rich.
Okay, so let's just bring some context into this. So we did look into this, and the founders of GC Strategies did have another company before this. What was that company called? It was called Corridel Systems Consulting Incorporated. And the company officers were the original 3 company officers that started GC Strategies: Caleb White, Christian Firth, and Darren Anthony. Now, listen, if Trudeau's trying to cast stones here and say, well, you know, they were giving them money in the beginning. Okay, well, when you're first doing business with a company in terms of the public service, you're not assuming that that company is going to be operating very shadily, right? The thing is this company has operated under the Liberal government, GC Strategies, for 8 years. And you haven't caught them doing anything, right? So we haven't seen any evidence of any sketchiness under Stephen Harper's regime in terms of procurement. We have seen a ton of evidence of sketchiness and criminality under the procurement system under Justin Trudeau. But, you know, he wants to talk about Harper and a company giving contracts to them, but he doesn't want to talk about only 4 years ago and the SNC Lavalin case, which he said that was settled. Nothing was settled. The investigation couldn't continue. Maybe you should watch Northern Perspective, Justin Trudeau.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That answer proves again that he's not worth the cost or the corruption. We know that after 8 years of this Prime Minister, the cost of everything has gone up, in part because he's given away money for nothing. In ArriveCan, an app that was supposed to cost $80,000 was actually, how much? $60 million, at least, and counting, because the Auditor General says she doesn't have the documentation to do the full calculation. Today, though, we have a common sense Conservative motion that will require the Prime Minister release the full cost of the app and recover the money for Canadians within the next 100 days. Will he vote for that common sense motion? Yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
And this is a beauty play that the Conservatives did in setting up this motion, because what is the number one thing on Canadians' minds right now?
Affordability.
Bingo. So why are they so mad about ArriveCan?
Because Canadians are lining up at food banks in unprecedented numbers. Canadians are starting to foreclose on their homes as their mortgages mature. Canadians are having trouble paying for heating bills because of this new carbon tax. Canadians are broke. And things weren't like this 8 years ago under Harper.
So what does this motion do? This motion is, if successful, forces Trudeau to go and get our money back from this criminally corrupt ArriveCan app, right? So it forces him to do that. And the problem is Trudeau can't agree with the Conservatives on this. So what does it do? It drives a further wedge between Justin Trudeau and his base, in that it proves he's out of touch with Canadians, and it demonstrates he doesn't give a damn about the taxpayer dollar.
To axe the tax, this Prime Minister wants to hike the tax. First of all, he wants to quadruple it between now and 2030. And on April 1st, he plans to hike it by 23% with the support of the NDP. The tax hike will be bigger than any increases in the rebate, and therefore people will be bigger, the average families in all the provinces will be bigger net losers under this tax than they were before. With Canadians unable to eat, heat, and house themselves, will the Prime Minister cancel his plan to hike the tax on April 1st?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I do believe this might be one of the first times the Leader of the Opposition has ever recognized that there is a Canada carbon rebate that he is going to cancel. Checks that he will prevent from delivering to Canadians right across the country. 8 out of 10 Canadians households get more money than they pay in carbon pricing in the provinces in which they apply. In Alberta, $1,800 a year to a family of 4. $1,200 a year in Manitoba. Even in Ontario, $1,120 to a family of 4 in Ontario. That's money in their pockets that he wants to take away.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, I'm glad he mentioned his phony rebates, because $1,800 $1,800 in Alberta is the rebate. That's what he said. You heard him. Here's the gross cost. $2,943.
Uh-oh.
Whoa, did you see that smile on Pierre? He knows he's got Trudeau trapped.
Oh, no.
He can finally show it with numbers and facts.
Oh, no.
This is bad for Trudeau and the Liberals.
Oh, crap. Oh.
I want to see how he's going to try to recover.
So do I.
So he's going to take away $2,943, but give back $1,800, and then ask you to be thankful for it, Mr. Speaker. Isn't that just proof that the carbon tax is just like him, not worth the cost?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The parliamentary budget officer himself recognized that the $1,800 in rebate that we're sending, for example, to a family of four in Alberta is more than that family of four costs with the price on pollution. That is the calculation that is done right across the country that shows that 8 out of 10 families are better off with the Canada carbon rebate than they pay in the price of pollution in areas in which it's brought in. We are both fighting climate change and delivering more money to households across the country, money that he wants to take away.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The mental and mathematical gymnastics that Trudeau is trying to do here is astounding. It's absolutely astounding. Are you are you seriously trying to say that Albertans are paying $4,700 in carbon tax for the year? I don't think so. Like, hello, you're saying they're getting $1,800 back. Meanwhile, they've paid $2,900 in. Trudeau, you're not getting this. Math doesn't work that way. 1 + 1 actually equals 2.
It being 3:23, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion of Mr. Poilievre relating to the business of supply. Call in the members.
So they're getting ready to vote on the ArriveCan motion that the Conservatives put in yesterday that took all day to debate.
Yeah, it was only supposed to go from, 10 until 2?
Yeah, and it went until like 5 or 6 o'clock at night.
Yeah. And then you can see here on the left, in the left bottom corner is the gallery. A few people are exiting. The rule for the House is that you cannot enter or leave while a vote is occurring. So if you need to leave, you need to leave now.
And here's the two party whips. They have to be in the room when a vote is called because they arrange the votes from the members of their own parties.
The question is as follows. Mr. Poilievre, seconded by Mr. Nader, move that, given that, 1, the Auditor General's ArriveCan audit determined that the app cost taxpayers at least $500 million, $650, may I dispense? At least $60 million, but concluded it is impossible to determine the actual cost of the application. 2, l'Ombudsman de l'approvisionnement a constaté.
2, the procurement ombud found that in 76% of ArriveCan contracts, some or all of the contractors' proposed resources, such as subcontractors and employees, did not perform any work.
GC Strategies, an IT company that does no actual IT work, was paid nearly $20 million in relation to the ArriveCan app. The House demande au Premier ministre
A, call on the Prime Minister to table in the House of Commons no later than Monday, March 18th, 2024, a report which details the complete, direct, and associated costs concerning the ArriveCan app incurred to date, including the total amounts paid to contractors and subcontractors, broken down by contractor or subcontractor, and the value of staff time represented by the salary, bonuses, and other expenses paid to all public servants who worked on the app. In relation to all expenses respecting 1. Research and development of the app. 2. Management and storage of the data collected by the app. 3. Software development, testing, and maintenance. 4. Training for government employees for using and troubleshooting the app. 5. call centers used for the app. 6. ArriveCan related communications with travelers by email or text message. 7. Market and opinion research. 8. Advertising. 9. Public relations. 10. Merchandise, gifts, and promotional material.
Of security clearances. 12. Travelers' expenses after being wrongfully directed by the ArriveCan app to quarantine. 13, the services of legal counsel involved in contract negotiation, litigation arising from procurement, or the use and implementation of the app, and the numerous investigations conducted related to the app. 14, any other costs related to the ArriveCan app. And B, demande au gouvernement de...
B, call on the government to collect and recoup all funds paid to ArriveCan contractors and subcontractors which did no work on the ArriveCan app within 100 days of this motion being adopted, and for the Prime Minister to table a report in the House demonstrating that taxpayer funds have been repaid.
The 10-minute period for members voting electronically has started, and the House will now proceed to the vote for members participating in person.
Okay, so this is the moment of truth on this motion. Now, we're expecting it to fail. And why are we expecting it to fail? Because if you heard in the beginning when Fergus was getting ready to read the motion, and we did that intentionally, even though it was long, he said, in the business of supply. So why is that important? Because the NDP are in a supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals. What does that mean? It means that not that they're supplying confidence. What it means is that on any votes related to supply, ergo money, they have agreed to support the Liberals. Confidence, in any votes of confidence, they have agreed to support the Liberals.
And sometimes a vote can be both supply and confidence.
Right. Like a budget vote is supply as well as confidence. Okay? The votes on ArriveCan were supply. They were not confidence votes. So we're expecting this to fail.
All those in favor of the motion will please now rise.
Mr. Scheer.
Mr. Scheer.
Mr. Schmale.
Mr. Schmale.
Mr. Bazan.
Mr. Bazan.
Mr. Kimmich.
Mr. Kimmich.
Mr. Perkins.
Mr. Perkins.
Mrs. Thomas.
Mrs. Thomas.
Mrs. Stubbs.
Mrs. Stubbs.
Mr. Paulus.
Mr. Paulus.
Mr. Halland.
Mr. Halland.
Miss Lewis Haldeman Norfolk.
Miss Lewis Haldeman Norfolk.
Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Barrett.
Mrs. Gray.
Mrs. Gray.
Mr. Barlow.
Mr. Barlow.
Mr. Moore.
Mr. Moore.
Mr. Ellis.
Mr. Ellis.
Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Davidson.
Mr. Davidson.
Mr. Small.
Mr. Small.
Mr. Brock.
Mr. Brock.
Mr. Berthold.
Mr. Berthold.
Miss Finley.
Miss Finley.
Mr. Abultaïd.
Mr. Abultaïf.
Mrs. Kuzi.
Mrs. Kuzi.
Miss Ferrari.
Miss Ferrari.
Mrs. Block.
Mrs. Block.
Mr. Stewart.
Mr. Stewart.
Mr. Strahl.
Mr. Strahl.
Mr. Doherty.
Mr. Doherty.
Mr. Macaulay and Minton West.
Mr. Macaulay Edmonton West.
Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Brassard.
Mr. Brassard.
Mrs. Goodrich.
Mrs. Goodrich.
Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Lawrence.
Monsieur Godin.
Monsieur Godin.
Madame Vien.
Madame Vien.
Mr. Morantz.
Mr. Morantz.
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Malillo.
Mr. Malillo.
Mr. Chambers.
Mr. Chambers.
Mrs. Cramp Nyman.
Mrs. Cramp Nyman.
Mrs. Roberts.
Mrs. Roberts.
Mr. Patzer.
Mr. Patzer.
Mrs. Gallant.
Mrs. Gallant.
Mr. Muse.
Mr. Muse.
Mr. Redekop.
Mr. Redekop.
Mr. Van Popta.
Mr. Van Popta.
Mr. Waugh.
Mr. Waugh.
Mr. Steinley.
Mr. Steinley.
Mr. Calkins.
Mr. Calkins.
Miss Roux.
Miss Roux.
Monsieur Lou.
Monsieur Lou.
Monsieur Généreux.
Monsieur Généreux.
Mr. Lobb.
Mr. Lobb.
Mr. Major.
Mr. Major.
Mrs. Vecchio.
Mrs. Vecchio.
Mr. Martel.
Mr. Martel.
Mr. Gould.
Mr. Gould.
Mr. Kurek.
Mr. Kirk.
Mr. Epp.
Mr. Epp.
Mr. Caputo.
Mr. Caputo.
Mr. Kitchen.
Mr. Kitchen.
Mr. Cram.
Mr. Cram.
Mr. Tolmie.
Mr. Colney.
Mrs. Wagentall.
Mrs. Wagentall.
Mrs. Falk, Battleford, Lloydminster.
Mrs. Falk, Battleford, Lloydminster.
Mr. Bragdon.
Mr. Bragdon.
Mr. Allison.
Mr. Allison.
Mr. Nader.
Mr. Nader.
Mr. Soroka.
Mr. Soroka.
Mr. McLean.
Mr. McLean.
Mr. Shipley.
Mr. Shipley.
Mr. McGuire.
Mr. McGuire.
Mr. Shields.
Mr. Shields.
Mr. Falk Provencher.
Mr. Falk Provencher.
Mr. Motts.
Mr. Motts.
Mr. Arnold.
Mr. Arnold.
Mr. Morrison.
Mr. Morrison.
Mr. Dowdle.
Mr. Dowdle.
Mr. Albus.
Mr. Albert.
Mr. Dalton.
Mr. Dalton.
Mr. Carey.
Mr. Carey.
Mr. Canna.
Mr. Cannon.
Mr. Leslie.
Mr. Leslie.
Mr. Majumdar.
Mr. Majumdar.
Monsieur Terrien.
Monsieur Terrien.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Madame Normandin.
Madame Normandin.
Monsieur Simard.
Monsieur Simard.
Monsieur Bergeron.
Monsieur Bergeron.
Monsieur Garon.
Monsieur Garon.
Madame de Bellefeuille.
Madame de Bellefeuille.
Madame
Block is
Michaud.
voting
Madame
for it.
Michaud.
Monsieur Fortin.
Monsieur Fortin.
Step in the right direction.
Brunet-Duceppe.
Monsieur Brunet-Duceppe.
Monsieur Villemur.
Monsieur Villemur.
Monsieur Thériault.
Monsieur Thériault.
Madame Gaudreau.
Madame Gaudreau.
Madame Larouche.
Madame Larouche.
Monsieur Perron.
Monsieur Perron.
Monsieur Barcelou-Duval.
Monsieur Barcelot-Duval.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Monsieur Savard Tremblay.
Madame Posé.
Madame Posé.
Monsieur Champoux.
Monsieur Champoux.
Monsieur Beaulieu.
Monsieur Beaulieu.
Madame Saint-Clair-de-Gagny.
Madame Saint-Clair-de-Gagné.
Madame Chabot.
Madame Chabot.
Monsieur Trudel.
Monsieur Trudel.
Madame Desbiens.
Madame Desbiens.
Monsieur Blanchette-Jonca.
Monsieur Blanchette-Jonca.
Madame Bérubé.
Madame Bérubé.
Monsieur Désilet.
Monsieur Desilets.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Julian.
Miss Kwan.
Miss Kwan.
Miss Blaney.
Miss... Oh.
The NDP broke rank. The NDP are voting against the Liberals in a supply motion. Wow.
This is significant.
Wow, folks.
There's Mr. Blakey.
All those opposed to the motion will please rise.
Mr. McKinnon-Gatineau.
Monsieur McKinnon-Gatineau.
Mr. Blair.
Mr. Blair.
Mr. Varani.
Mr. Varani.
Miss Sachs.
Miss Sachs.
Miss Chager.
Miss Chager.
Mr. McKay.
Mr. McKay.
Mr.
The
McGinty.
table will now compile the results of the vote.
Yeas pour 170, 170. Nays contre 149, 149.
Je déclare la motion adoptée.
I declare the motion carried.
Wow, folks. That was unexpected
And significant.
and significant.
And we have heard that this is a non-binding motion. I haven't actually been able to confirm that. I'm looking currently for the motion text. I have found the vote, but not the motion itself. So that might be a few days to show up in Hansard still. However, even if it's a non-binding motion, it signifies that the Bloc and the NDP are not in support of the Liberals.
Yeah, they are not tied to them at the hip, right? And this is significant that the NDP voted against the Liberals in a supply-related motion. That's interesting. It doesn't mean that they're that they're going to vote against them in actual non-confidence votes, but I think we can all agree it's a step in the right direction.